before we get started with the discussion or the topic, how's everybody's hives looking? Starting to see drones, a little bit of drones, not a lot. Probably by this time next week, there'll be a lot more drones in the hives. We were starting to see a lot of them hatch. Food is still kind of scarce. We're feeding a lot of ours syrup. We're only feeding probably about half of them now.
2 to 1?
1 to 1.
1 to 1?
Yeah, you want thin syrup right now because thin syrup stimulates brood rearing. So you want to stimulate the brood rearing. Thick syrup is just going to provide them with carbohydrates. So we're feeding 1 to 1 sugar syrup. We pulled a lot of our pollen patties off just because the bees weren't touching them, and we're starting to see small hive beetle in them. So make sure you check your pollen patties if you've got those on, and make sure you don't have a small hive beetle issue. But we pulled those off. But I'd say we're probably a week to 2 weeks from it seeing any swarms. Supposedly there was one in Jackson County last week. I don't know if that was true or not, but we're getting our swarm traps up. We hope to have the rest of them up this week. We've got about, I think we've got 12 or 13 of them up. We've got about 6 or 7 more to put up. So, but swarm season's around the corner. If you haven't been in your hives, it's time to start looking and seeing how many frames of brood and how much space, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. But we're just starting to see drones. So most of the drones, so if you ever watch your drones in the hive, your drones are going to be in 1 of 2 places as they're walking around the hive. They're going to be in the brood nest with the brood, and those are the immature drones. Those drones are not ready to fly and they're not sexually mature to mate. Once they start moving out towards the honey and the pollen area, that's when they become sexually mature. They'll stay in the brood nest and demand that they be fed until they're mature, and then once they're mature, they'll go out to the honey area or the honey supers, and they'll start feeding themselves. So that's how you can tell how far along your drones are. After your drones hatch, it takes them about 7 to 10 days to become mature enough to go begin flying and go begin mating with queens. And we just don't have those drones out flying yet, and I don't think until we see those drones out flying, we're not going to see a lot of swarms. Plus, some of the stuff we've seen, me and Tom cut out a hive Friday out of a shed, and I was surprised at how little honey they had stored. I mean, we didn't get hardly any honey out of that hive, and it was a monstrous hive. So I think that until we get the nectar flow, the autumn olive hits, I think once the autumn olive hits is when we'll start seeing the swarms. The autumn olive is budding, but it's not bloomed yet. So I think that's when we'll see our first big nectar flow. Anybody else seen anything that?
There's a lot of dandelions.
A lot of dandelions.
They were on them just a little bit ago.
Yeah.
But
they're working the purple dead nettle. I had somebody send me pictures today, and they're like, why does this honeybee have a stripe down the back?
So, when do you think is a good time to set up your honey supers?
It depends on how strong your hive is. If your hive is strong and packed, I'd go ahead and get them on. It's not going to hurt. But if you've got a weaker hive, like some of ours are still a little weaker, and we're going to baby them along for another week or 2 until they start building up. So it's just like anything else. You want to once your brood nest is out to 8 frames and taking up 80% of the box, then that's when you want to start thinking about your honey supers, or if you want to do a double brood box, whichever one you want to do. It's important. So if you take any frame out of any hive, medium or deep, if you pull that frame out and that frame is covered in brood, when that brood hatches, it will cover between 2 and 3 frames. So those bees, when they hatch, there'll be enough bees there to warm, feed, and cover 2 to 3 frames. So a hive can grow exponentially really, really quick. So a hive with 2 to 3 frames of brood this week can have 6 to 8 frames of brood next week. Because remember, your queen can lay 1,500 eggs a day, so she can start building up really, really quick. So your population is going to double about every 10 days right now. So it's good to get in your hives. Every week we've been going in, we've been counting the number of brood frames in each hive. Then we go back and look at our notes and say, okay, this one had this number this week, it's to this number now, and it'll be at this number next week. So then we can kind of plan how many supers we need to take out and stuff like that when we go. So look at how many frames of brood you have. If you get a warm day this afternoon or this week or this weekend, and how many frames of brood. And if you've got a 10 frame box and you've got 6 frames of brood, I would go ahead and start supering. If you've only got 2 or 3 frames of brood, you've probably got another week before you need to start supering. I hate to say it just depends, but it just depends. There's no real, for me, there's no real hard, fast rule, but you're better to err on the side of caution and put them on than to leave them off right now. Because once the autumn olive hits, it's going to be game on. There's so much autumn olive out there ready to bloom. The maple trees are about done. Purple dead nettle still in full bloom. That's why I see them working most, is the purple dead nettle. And right now the apple trees are starting to bloom. So if the cold the next 3 nights doesn't kill off the apple tree blooms, they'll be hitting the apple trees pretty hard this year. Ours are loaded with blooms. I don't know. You got apple trees on you. You got a lot of blooms on yours? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, they're blooming.
pears loaded too.
Pears are loaded, yeah.
Yeah, they're really blooming.
I don't know, I got them at 5 apple trees and they don't even touch them.
They're not touching your apple trees?
They don't never touch them.
Huh.
Everything else does, but the honeybees don't mess with the apples out home. I guess there's enough other
Must have
stuff.
been enough the other stuff.
Something else I like.
Yeah. So tonight, since we're getting into the beginning of storm season, we want to talk a little about swarm control. Keeping your bees in your box to make you more honey. That's the goal. We want to keep our bees in our box. We don't want them in the trees. So basically, swarm prevention can be summed up as providing the queen with enough space to lay eggs. As long as she has enough space to lay eggs, then she's going to be happy and the bees are going to be happy and they're not going to swarm. And this also allows your hive to grow large and strong and have that strong workforce that they need to produce the maximum amount of honey. So studies typically say 1,500 to 2,000 eggs a day, and a worker bee takes 21 days. So if you do a little math, that means that from the first egg until 21 days later when it hatches, that queen can lay up to 36,814 eggs in that 21-day period at maximum production. So if you think about your deep frames have about 6,000 cells per frame, a medium frame has about 3,000 cells per frame. So a single deep 10 frame will have 60,000 bees. So you've got about 20 to 25,000 more cells than what she needs in a single 10 frame deep. That's why a lot of the beekeepers will talk about single brood box management or single deep brood box management, because there's more than enough cells in there as long as the bees don't fill them with honey. An 8 frame double medium will have about 48,000 cells. So still more than enough room. If you want to run 8 frame mediums, you'll have to have 2 brood boxes for the queen to lay. And this is important because once she gets going, you're not going to slow her down. The only thing that's going to slow her down is if she runs out of space to lay. And when she runs out of space to lay, she starts shrinking, and that's when they start thinking about swarming. So, as long as the bees put honey in the supers, and you keep your brood box open, your hive won't swarm throughout the bee season. But as soon as they start backfilling that brood nest, you got to remember the number one goal of this hive, whether it's your hive or a hive in a tree, is to make more hives. So we want to prevent that. So workers during the rush of a honey flow will get lazy. Even though they're hard workers, they'll get lazy and they'll start depositing the nectar in the lower box closest to the entrance, because there's such a rush of nectar coming in that they want to get that nectar unloaded as quick as possible and get back out and get more. So instead of carrying it all the way up to the top, they're going to deposit it, especially if there's not enough workers to move it up to the top. They're going to deposit it in the brood nest, and that's called backfilling the brood nest. And this is the number one cause of swarming, is when they start backfilling the brood nest. So this is a picture of backfilling the brood nest. If you look, you've got your brood cells. They're about ready to hatch, and everything that's hatched is full of nectar. So now the queen is out of space to lay. So when the queen runs out of space to lay, if they're filling these up as quick as they hatch, and she runs out of space to lay, then the bees are going to get antsy, and that's what causes them to swarm. So you want to make sure that they have plenty of space in this brood nest for that queen to lay. And if you can keep that queen laying consistently, and she has plenty of space to lay, then you're going to keep her from swarming. Actually, it's the workers that decide to swarm, but you're going to keep them from swarming. So number one thing to prevent swarming is identifying some of the key characteristics of when the hive is thinking about swarming. The first thing is the bees are going to start to backfill the brood nest. You're going to notice that nectar, and everything that's hatched, you're going to notice nectar in it. The next thing you're going to notice less young larvae. Remember, it's springtime. That hive wants to grow, But if you notice less young larvae, and again, this is why we count our frames of brood. We count open brood versus cap brood when we go through our hives. I'll call off, and my wife's taking notes. I'll say we have 4 frames of cap brood, 2 frames of open brood. And we can kind of go back in our notes and look. But less young larvae when they should be building up, and less cap brood shows that your queen is slowing down. The other thing that you'll start seeing right before they swarm is you'll see a large increase in drones, and they're on the food. They're not in with the brood nest or anything like that. They're either in the honey supers or they're over on the edges in the food eating. And that's your sexually mature drones, and the larger the drone population is, the more likely the hive is to swarm. The next thing you'll see is we've started seeing this, and I didn't take any pictures, but they'll start building out queen cups. Queen cups are the start of a queen cell, but they don't have an egg or a larva in them yet. So when you start seeing these queen cups appearing, you'll notice you'll see them on the bottom of the frame and on the sides of the frame. That's an indication that they could be thinking about swarming, and you need to investigate those queen cups. It doesn't hurt even if you find queen cells, to tear down 1 or 2 queen cells, because they always have multiple. But open up some of these queen cups and look and see if there's an egg in them. That's going to be your first indication that they're thinking about swarming. So take your hive tool and break a couple of them down and see if there's anything in them. But if you start seeing a lot of queen cups start appearing in your hive, that's a good indication that they could be thinking about swarming. Not always, but it's a good indication. So again, once you see that brood nest backfilling, if you're seeing less brood, you see a large number of drones, you start seeing queen cups, that's an indication that they're seriously thinking about swarming. So it's too late if those queen cups have larvae. It might be too late. If the queen cells are capped, once the queen cells are capped, more than likely the hive is already swarmed. Usually as soon as those first cells are capped on these early spring swarms, as soon as those cells are capped, they're usually heading out and they're in the trees. No matter what, do not destroy queen cells unless you're 100% confident your queen is still in your hive. If you tear down those queen cells and the queen is not in your hive, you've just made your hive hopelessly queenless. They have no more ability to raise a queen, so they're going to end up without a queen, and they're not going to have the ability to raise one. And then the problem is with destroying the queen cells, even if you think you get 100% of the queen cells, there's likely to have one hidden away somewhere that you missed, and they're going to swarm anyway. If they get to this point, the best thing to do is a split. And we're going to talk about a type of split when we talk about some of these methods that you can do, that you can hopefully still preserve your honey harvest and still do a small split off these hives. But once they get to this point, it's too late. Once they have those queen cells, it's too late to drive that impulse out of them. The only thing that you can do is go ahead and do a split and manually make them swarm yourself and take control of that swarm. But beyond that, there's not much else you can do. For new beekeepers, you're going to need drawn comb in your new hive. So whenever we talk about swarm control in a new hive for new beekeepers on your first year, is you want to do what's called checkerboarding. The bees want to be organized. They want to keep that brood nest nice and tight. They want to keep everything close together. So what you're going to do is you're going to open that brood nest up and you're going to drop an empty frame of foundation in. And what that will do is that will trigger those nurse bees. They don't like that disorganization. They don't like that brood nest spread out, so they're going to immediately start drawing out that frame. And this is the best and quickest way for new beekeepers to get comb drawn is by continuously inserting new frames in between the brood. That does two things. One, it gets you your comb drawn out, because remember, you're going to need to have at least 2 boxes of drawn comb to get through your first winter. And 2, it gives you drawn comb to use next year to super to be able to get your honey harvest. So basically, you're going to checkerboard these in, and every time you do this, you're going to add a box. I've got a picture of it. I didn't bring any frames with me tonight, but you can see you've got the old frames in between the new frames. So basically, what they did was they took a new box. They pulled up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 old frames into this box. So they put 6 new frames in the bottom box, and then they put 4 new frames in this box to open that up, to open up that brood nest and give them some space. And this is called checkerboarding. This is the easiest and simplest way of controlling swarming. without doing a split.
And what do you do with them, the one empty, the full frames you took out?
He'll put them in the next box up. You'll just keep adding boxes and keep spreading that brood nest out. The problem is if you do this, like we're gonna have 20-degree nights coming up. If you would have done this too early in this season, you could cause some chilled brood if they don't have enough population. Earlier in the season, I recommend, instead of putting these in the middle, is basically in the hive, I'm gonna put my brood and my bees in the middle. I'm gonna put my empty frames on the outside. My next box, I'm gonna have my brood and stuff in the middle and my empty frames on the outside, and let them work, have a chimney in the middle of their brood and bees, and then let them work outside. I'll do that earlier in the season. Once we start getting warmer temps here in about a week or two, then I'm just gonna checkerboard them. And this is one of the easiest ways. You don't have to find the queen to do this. You don't have to know how much brood you have to do this. You just have to be able to stick the frames in there once they get them drawn out. And just every time that they get all 4 of these frames drawn out and they start using those frames, another box. Checkerboard it again, another box, checkerboard it again, and just keep going up. The problem with this you get into is if you want to run deeps and mediums, is at some point in time, you're gonna have to transition to these mediums. That's one of the reasons I like all mediums, is because I don't only have one size of box to worry about. All I've got is medium boxes and medium frames, and I can just checkerboard this thing all the way as tall as I can get it, if I wanted to. Well, if you're gonna try to run 2 different sizes, it becomes a little trickier. You're gonna have to play some games. Sometimes you'll end up with a medium box and medium frame and a deep box. It's not the end of the world. We were talking about that earlier. They will build comb on the bottom of that frame, but they usually don't attach it to the side and the bottom. And what you can do is when you're done with that comb is you can just take your bread knife and cut that comb off and put that frame up in the medium. But this is why I'm a big fan of either going all deeps or all mediums, is because you can checkerboard this until it's taller than you are. Queen excluders. Queen and drones, because of their size, can't cross through these, but the worker bees can. When you first put these on in the spring, the workers don't like to cross these. Every year I get a call from 1 or 2 beekeepers that said, hey, I was running out of space for my brood nest, so I put my honey supers on, and I put a queen excluder on. That they had the honey supers, there was nothing in them, either foundation or drawn comb, and there was no reason for the bees to cross this queen excluder. And what the bees did was they just took that as a barrier and just ended up swarming. They didn't move across this. So we've got to kind of tempt the bees to go across this. Sometimes these are called honey excluders because if you don't use them correctly, like I said, you'll end up with all your honey down below and your bees will swarm and you'll never get honey up into your supers. So you've got to use these with caution. We want to try to use the bee's natural biology. If you don't ever put a queen excluder on, the bee's natural biology is going to keep the brood at the entrance. The bees need to be able to control the brood temperature. Remember, they want that brood temperature at 92 degrees, no more than 95 degrees. If that brood gets all the way up here in the top, away from the entrance, they have a harder time controlling that temperature. So naturally, the bees are going to keep the brood towards the entrance and the honey will be away from the entrance. So even if you don't put a queen excluder on, as you build this up taller and taller, the brood is going to stay down towards the bottom and the honey is going to work its way towards the top. I didn't use queen excluders up until just a few years ago, and I mainly used them just for queenery. We don't use a lot of queen excluders on our production hives. We're doing some other techniques that we're trying to learn with that we're going to talk about tonight that we use queen excluders. But with 70 some hives, I've only got 8 queen excluders. Like I said, I mainly use them for rearing queens and keeping queens separate. But use these with caution. The other thing you gotta watch is if you take a frame of brood and it's got drone brood on it and you put drone brood up above a queen excluder, the drones cannot get out. So you're gonna trap your drones up there and they'll end up dying. And I've done this personally, I've done this myself. Is you'll come in and you'll find hundreds of drones dead stuck in this queen excluder because they were trying to get through that queen excluder to get out and go fly and mate, and they couldn't get out and they just ended up dying in that queen excluder. So if you're going to put a queen excluder on and you're going to move brood up towards the top, make a small entrance in the top to let the drones out. Some people will drill drone escape holes in their boxes, like a 1/4-inch hole just in their boxes. They'll also use it for their treatments, but that'll let the drones get out if you put a queen excluder on and you had it happen to pull some drone brood up into the top box. Because I have done it, I have killed a bunch of drones. Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about alternative methods of swarm prevention. These methods date back more than 100 years to the beginning of the Langstroth hive, and we still use this. There's beekeepers out there that still use them today. They're very, very relevant, and you've actually probably seen some YouTube videos on them. But remember, for the new guys, new beekeepers, keep it simple, stupid. Some of these techniques require weekly, detailed manipulations. You're going to have to be in your hive every week, and you're going to have to be able to find your queen every week. If you don't perform these manipulations on time, you will cause swarming. Some of these methods are the Doolittle method, the Snellgrove method, and the Demarest method. I've used the Doolittle method and the Demarest method. I'm going to be using the Snellgrove method for the first time this year. I'm really, really, really happy with the Demarest method. I've done it the last 2 years, and we've been really, really happy with the honey production and the swarm prevention. But it is probably the most time-consuming of all the methods also. So Doolittle, he's the father of our modern queen rearing. If you ever heard of scientific queen rearing, he's the one that wrote that book in the 1870s, and we still graft and raise queens that way. He wrote another book at the beginning of the early 1900s called A Year's Work in the Out Apiary, and this is where the Doolittle method comes from. This book was written back when he had to switch back and forth between a car and a horse and buggy to be able to go tend his bees depending on road conditions. But it's still a very, very applicable method. He used these to manage his out yards because he couldn't always get to those out yards because of weather, because the car would break down, the horse wouldn't be ready, he couldn't get the wagon was broken down. He talks about all sorts of stuff in his book, why he couldn't get to his hives. So, when the fruit trees are blooming, which is right now, he would equalize his hives. What he would do he would take brood from a strong hive and move it to the weak hives. This slowed down the strong hives and boosted the weak hives. But again, don't move your queen. You got to be able to find your queen to do this, because if you move your queen, you're going to end up with 2 queens fighting each other, and it's never a good thing. But he would do this. And we've been doing this the last few weeks. The number one problem we're having with growth right now isn't food, it's heat. Bees have to keep that brood nest 92 degrees, and they have to have population to do that. So we're taking a frame of brood, or 2 frames of brood, from our stronger hives and moving them to a weak hive, and then giving the stronger hive an empty frame. What that does, that's not going to slow that queen down. Remember, she can lay 1,500 eggs a day, so she's going to fill that frame back up pretty quick. It will slow them down maybe 3 or 4 days on your strong hives, but it'll give that weak hive the boost that it needs. 2 weeks later, he would come. He would take everything off of the bottom board. He would take everything off of the bottom board. He would put a new box on his bottom board. He would add a frame. He would find his queen in here, and he would put the frame with the queen back in this box. And then he would put empty foundation or empty comb in here, and he would shake out every other frame in that box. He would shake them out right in front and basically create an artificial swarm. Those bees would come in here. If it was already drawn comb and their queen was in there, she would immediately start laying. You have a huge population of what? Foragers, because there's not that much brood. He's taking their brood away from him. So he's got a bunch of foragers, and they're going to go out and forage and fill this hive up. In the meantime, the queen is going to lay and build that back up, and then he would either make nukes out of this brood, or we would give it to weaker hives and boost his weaker hives. This was called making a shook swarm. If you've ever heard anybody talk about doing a shook swarm, this is how you would do it. On my hive stands, when I do it, because they sit up off the ground, in his book he talks about his hive set almost directly on the ground so they could march right back in. But I'll take and put a bed sheet underneath here and shake them out on the bed sheet and let them march back in. And he would do this. He would have, trying to find his picture in here, he would have 36 hives in a yard. and he would just systematically go down through this bee yard and do this. He would shake these bees out, and then he would put the super on it. Yeah, here's his bee yard layout. He had 36 hives in each yard, and he would just go right down the row and do these shook swarms 2 weeks after he did his equalization. If they weren't strong enough to do a shook swarm, that's the ones that he would give that brood to, or he would make up a nucleus colony, take it back to his home yard and use those for queen rearing or for other hives. But this is how he manages his out yards. Like I said, you would add honey frames to the second box, use a queen excluder if you would like, but then he would, every 3 to 4 weeks, he would come back and do the same thing over. He would just come back and do a shook swarm every 3 to 4 weeks. If you don't want to make a nuke and you don't have anything else to do with your brood, what you can do, where'd my queen excluder go?
I think it's on top of that box.
It's on top of this, yeah.
Yeah.
I should have grabbed the yellow one, it's easier to see. Is he would put his queen down here, he would shake all the bees off, give them drawn comb, he would put his queen excluder on, he would put his supers on, and then he would put his frames of brood up here. And then when these hatch, they would just come down and work their way down through here, and then he would come back in a couple weeks and take this off. Basically, they're going to fill up these supers first because they're closer to the entrance, and the bees are going to work their way back down and out. But he would do this every 2 to 3 weeks, and he called this his shook swarm method. He said in his out yards that he averaged on bad years, he averaged 114 pounds of honey on a bad year per hive, and on his good years, he averaged 160 pounds of honey on his good years.
Good.
The other thing you can do is if you do end up making nukes, this is one thing that he talks about, and also Kirk Webster and I'm trying to think of the other guy up in Vermont talk about, is they would use their 5-frame nukes, and whenever that queen needed more space in that 5-frame nuke, they would take frames of brood out and they would put it in their honey production hive to give them that population. It would boost that population. They would do it up high in the honey hive. But that's another thing you can do, is you can use your nukes to provide brood stimulation for your production hives. But by doing this every 3 to 4 weeks, you're simulating the swarming, and you're encouraging that large brood nest and that large population. Because remember, that queen's going to go back in there. If she's got drawn combs, she's going to lay 2,000 eggs a day. She's going to get that laid up really, really quick. And in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, when you come back, all that brood's going to be hatched. And then you're going to shake out another swarm and give them back empty frames again. So you're constantly stimulating this and thinking it's swarm. The Snellgrove method. L.E. Snellgrove. This method again dates back to the early 1900s. He's from over in Great Britain. He wrote a book on his method of swarm prevention and honey production. This is the method I have not personally tried, and it's the one I'm going to be using this year. This allows a significant number of bees in your parent hive while maintaining a nucleus colony with a backup queen. And again, we're going to set one of these up here in a week or two, and then we'll be monitoring it as part of Bee Club. So it does require a Snellgrove board, which is basically a double screen board. If you've never seen or used a double screen board, basically it's any piece of plywood or sheet goods that's more than 1/2 of an inch, and it's got a screen on both sides of it. And the reason for the screen on both sides of it is it allows heat to migrate up through, so it can get from the large brood nest to the smaller brood nest. The other thing is because it's more than 1/2 inch, the bees can't transfer the queen pheromone. If it's less than 1/2 inch, the bees can get their legs, their antenna and stuff through that, and they can transfer the queen pheromone up. So this keeps them from transferring that queen pheromone. If you ever watched Mr. Ed, Jeff Horkoff on YouTube, he's really big on doing double screen board splits. You could use a Snellgrove board as a double screen board split, but Snellgrove has his own method to do this for honey production. We're going to talk about that real quick. So, the first thing you're going to do is you got to go through the entire hive and you gotta find your queen. Once you find your queen, she's gonna go in the bottom box. You're gonna remove all other frames of brood. So you're gonna take every other brood frame out, and you're gonna put them in a second brood box. So I'm gonna put one frame in here with my queen, and I'm gonna put all my other brood in the second box, and I'm gonna give her either undrawn foundation, or I'm gonna give her drawn comb if I have it available. So I'm gonna shake all the bees except for 2 frames. So all these frames with brood, I'm gonna shake all these bees except for 2 frames. I'm just gonna leave them the brood and 2 frames of bees. So I'm gonna leave them really, really thin with lots of brood. So I'm gonna, after I get this set up in the bottom, I'm gonna place my supers. So I'm gonna put 2 supers on. I'm gonna place my snell growth board. Now if you look, the snell growth board has these little doors all the way around it. So I want my snell growth board, there's gonna be one side without the doors. It's gonna go the same direction as the entrance. And I'm gonna open door number 1. And I'm gonna put these bees in this brood up here. Now the advantage is they're gonna get the heat to allow that brood to continue to be raised from the bottom. All your foragers that are in here, and as they hatch, they're gonna orient to this door. So they're gonna come out, they're gonna do the orientation flights, they're gonna orient to this door in that first week or so. And every week, what you're gonna do is once a week I'm gonna come out, I'm gonna close this door, I'm gonna open this door, then I'm gonna come around to the bottom, I'm gonna open that door. So what I did was all the foragers that were oriented to this door right here, they're now not gonna be able to get in this door, they're gonna go in this door and they're gonna join the bigger hive. And then my new bees that are hatching to forage here are gonna come out of this door and orient and go out and forage for a week. And once a week, for 3 weeks, I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna change these doors. I'm gonna close this door, and open this door. And then again, in a week, I'm gonna come and I'm gonna close these doors. Actually, I'm gonna open this door, close it. I'm gonna close this door, open this door. So all my foragers are gonna bleed down, and I'll open this one on this side. Now when I get to this side, I should have a queen hatching and mating up here. So I'm gonna monitor this box, and as soon as this queen is mated, I can either pull this off, and I've got a new hive, and I can start this process over, or I can just continue once that queen is mated, and every week, just continue bleeding brood from this hive down into this hive, or bleeding foragers, I'm sorry. So I can keep bleeding foragers that this hive is producing down here to build up the population, so I've got that nice strong population down here. He actually recommends, after you get a queen up here that's mated and laying, is to remove this nuke and start another nuke, and then do a complete inspection on this, and again, go with 1 frame with the queen down here, and just keep repeating this process every 3 weeks. He said that on average, he averaged around 130 pounds a season per hive doing this method, plus he ended up with a nuke off of each hive. At least 1 nuke, sometimes 2. And again, this is something we're gonna try this year. We've never done it. There's a beekeeper that I know that does this. Last year was his first year. He was really, really happy with the way it turned out. This is probably, other than the Doolittle method, this is probably the least intensive. You're not lifting boxes every week. You're just going out and opening and closing doors.
Did you make that?
Yeah, I made it. There's plans online. You can take this one and measure it. And I'll let you, if anybody wants to borrow the book, I can let you borrow the book. And he's got variations. He's got 4 different variations on his method to accomplish different goals. If you want that nuke, or if you want more nukes or less nukes, he's got a bunch of different variations in his book on how to use this board. But he came up with that in the early 1900s. You can buy those online. Man Lake sells them. There's a couple other places that sell them, yeah. But there's not a lot of people that talk about them, but the logic behind it and the theory behind it sounds like it would work really, really well. And again, you're not lifting boxes every week and doing a lot of maintenance. You're giving that queen the space that she needs, plus you're raising a nuke off of it. So again, the foragers will leave door 1 and then they'll return to the bottom entrance. After week 1, you close door 1, open door 2, and you work your way around through this. But you're constantly bleeding these foragers off of this nuke, keeping this nuke kind of weak, but you're also building up your main population in your colony. And again, once the queen of the nuke is made, you can remove the nuke and check the parent hive, and you can do this over and over again. You may need to add a feeder to the nuke since you are bleeding the foragers off every week, and they are going to be weak on foragers. It may not hurt to add a feeder into that nucleus colony on the top, just so that you can maintain them and keep them fed. Dim array. We've done the dim array now for 2 years. We averaged on our dim array hives last year. We actually kept notes and kept weights. We averaged about 125 to 130 pounds per hive that we had in dim array of honey. This is a very, very labor intensive. Again, if you get on YouTube and you look and if you read the papers and stuff like that, there's a bunch of different variations, but I'm going to talk about the way that we did it. You are going to be lifting every box every week. You're going to produce large hives. These hives that we had last year, they had so many bees in them. I was astonished how many bees they had in them. But you have to be able to find your queen every week without fail, or this method can backfire on you. So, setup. It's going to be very, very similar to some of the others we talked about. We're going to start off with our brood box on the bottom. We're going to put our queen down here, and we're going to put all of our capped brood, just capped brood. If it's open brood, it's going to go into another box. We're going to set it off to the side for now. So we're going to put our queen and all of our capped brood, and then we're going to put in there any empty frames or undrawn foundation that we want drawn out. Next, we're going to put our excluder, and then we're going to put our honey supers. And then we're going to take all of this open brood or uncapped brood, and it's going to go on the top, and then we'll put our lid on. The advantage of this is this is going to draw all the nurse bees up through here. They're going to be forced to constantly go back and forth between that excluder. This is one of the best ways that I've found to get bees to easily cross an excluder is by drawing these nurse bees as they hatch down here. They're going to move up here. This is going to do 2 things. One, it's going to get the nurse bees to cross the excluder. It's going to get all the workers to cross the excluder. 2, as the nurse bees cross the excluder and go up here to feed the brood, they're not in the way of the returning bees that are bringing back the nectar. There's less congestion in the bottom box because most of the brood that's being fed and cared for is in the upper box. Everything in the bottom is hatching out and going straight up to the top. So what we found last year is we always had a really, really strong population in the top, and then we could watch that population over a period of 2 or 3 weeks. As we did this box would just build up and it was just wall-to-wall bees. It was just crazy the amount of bees in there. The problem that you can get into with this, and this is why you have to get in this and do this every week, is these nurse bees and this open brood is a decent distance away from the queen. Her pheromone is going to dissipate by the time it gets up here, and they're going to draw out emergency cells in this thing every week. So you have to go through this every week, every 7 to 10 days, and you have to go in and tear down all queen cells in the top box. Every time we would go to work this top box, we would take this box off and set it on a stand, and then we'd put an empty box up here. We would shake every frame off, and we would visually inspect every frame and look for any sign of a queen cell, and we would tear down any queen cell that we found. Once we got those bees shook off, then we'd pull our honey supers. If they were full of honey, we would go ahead and extract them. If they weren't, then we would put them back on. We typically we're medium, so we would run 2 medium boxes for our brood box, 3 honey supers, and then 2 more medium boxes. So these were really, really tall hives we were having to work with. We'll pull our queen excluder. We'll go through here. We'll pull out any open brood. It's going to go back to the top, and any capped brood is going to go in the bottom. And we do that every week. Like I said, this gets very, very labor intensive. The boxes are 6 to 8 boxes tall, and you have to be able to find your queen. But again, we had a huge honey crop off of this last year. If you miss a queen cell, because what you're going to do is you're taking all this cat brood down to the bottom. If you miss that queen cell, you're going to put a queen cell in there with her, and they're going to swarm like that. So you have to make sure that you go through and find those queen cells every week. If not, you're going to end up with a problem. Now, this is something we did do on accident last year, and it actually kind of worked out. We had one of these set up, and it overwintered like this. And we forgot about it. We forgot to go back and do the last check and move the brood down. We ended up with a queen up here and a queen down here. We ended up with a 2-queen hive. And what we ended up doing for winter was we ended up putting a queen excluder in here, but we overwintered a 2-queen hive. It had a queen in the bottom and a queen in the top. First time I've ever done it, I've ever pulled it off, but it was kind of interesting to see that we had a queen at the top and the bottom. The only reason we were able to do that, because if you didn't have a top entrance, that queen with that queen excluder never would have been able to get out to go to mate. But when we have that small top entrance on all of our lids, she was able to go out and mate, and she ran her own hive in the top and overwintered like that. There is some literature out there, and again, it's a lot of labor. What they'll do is instead of using a single queen excluder, is they'll have a complete set of brood, a queen down here, 3 or 4 honey supers, another queen excluder, and another brood box. It's called a 2-queen system. And they'll run a queen on the bottom and a queen on the top, and the foragers and the workers will intermingle with each other, and they'll end up building a huge honey crop because you got 2 hives working the same honey supers. I have not tried that yet. Like I said, we ended up with a 2-queen hive on accident, and it was too late in the year for them to produce honey. They had enough stores to get through winter, so we just overwintered them like that. We didn't mess with them. We weren't going to try to tear them down in the middle of winter and go through them. And we found it in October is when we found the 2-queen hive. But there are beekeepers that will run a 2-queen setup for honey production. But again, all these, like I said, there's several alternatives of these on YouTube. One is doing a dim array split and going back a week later and just tearing down the queen cells in the top. And then when that brood hatches, that just becomes a honey super. The other one is to do a dim array split. So after a week, we put a double screen board in. We'll put a double screen board right here. And we'll just run a nuke on top of our hive using a double screen board. That's another way to do a split. So if you search dim array on YouTube, you're going to get 4 or 5 different variations of this. I'm just saying the way that we did it with switching the brood every week and finding the queen. So all these methods create the same outcome. Is to make a large honey crop, prevent swarming. We're going to do the following. We're going to give the queen copious amounts of room to lay. That's all we're doing with these methods, is we're giving her plenty of space to lay a lot of brood. The other thing we're trying to do is trying to easily get the queen or the bees across an excluder. If you're using one, we're keeping the honey out of the brood nest, and that keeps the bees from swarming and gets us more honey production. There's so many different ways of swarm prevention, of swarm control and honey production. These are just some 100-year-old ways that have been around that people are just now rediscovering. They're rediscovering these old books and finding these old methods and playing around with them. They work. Some of them work really, really well. But again, it's all the same basic principle. Giving the queen a place to lay to create a large hive, and that keeps them from swarming and gives you a lot of honey. Any questions?
Is there any advantage to having a small entrance at the top just for honey production, and so they can come in the top or the bottom? Or
There's no advantage for honey production. We started doing that for ventilation, especially in the wintertime, to allow them to get condensation out. We found it has advantages and disadvantages. One right now is as your hive works up through the boxes in the wintertime, they start in the bottom, they eat their honey, and they get in the top. So now a lot of our hives are using the top entrance and not hardly using the bottom entrance. So we have to watch because we're getting mice in our bottom entrance because the bees aren't really using the bottom entrance. That's one of the disadvantages that we found. The other thing is when we want to trap pollen and we want to keep them from using this top entrance, it's hard to keep them from using that top entrance once they get used to using it. Those are just minor disadvantages. We found a lot of advantages. One, again, right now I've got 2 at my house and the weeds are just piled up in front of them because I haven't weed eated yet. The grass and everything else. They're using the top entrance because it's a lot easier. If the grass or the snow or something else gets piled up in front of them, it doesn't affect their ventilation or ability to get in and out. Again, if you put a queen excluder on here and you've got a bunch of brood or drones up here, those drones can escape. That queen can go out and mate. So it has advantages.
I didn't know if just to use it during the honey flow and take it off, or.
This is our lid all year round.
Okay.
Basically, it's got a 1 inch of foam insulation in here, and then again, just a small entrance just for ventilation, and the bees will use it. We found a couple of these that because we normally don't, we run a smaller entrance on these. We found a couple of these that they had propolised off the entire bottom entrance and are just using the top right now, but they're starting to chew out the propolis and use the bottom entrance again.
Where'd you find your metal?
It's just flashing metal. It's a roll of flashing metal.
I mean, the hardware store guys? Okay.
Yep. Cut it with a utility knife. Basically, you can score it with a straight edge and snap it. And then I don't have a brake. I just set this down on a flat workbench, put a couple of clamps on it, and just kind of tap it up with a hammer and fold it over. Works out pretty good. The thing about the flashing metal is it's a little bit thinner, so you can poke a hole in it real easy. I've actually got some trim coils, a little bit thicker. I'm going to use the rest of them. I just had that roll left over. I think 100-foot roll, I think I can get like 50 or so lids out of a 100-foot roll. So it's about $100 for a 100-foot roll flashing.
So the flashing, does it come in 18 inches or 16 or what?
It comes
I
in
know it's perfect probably for
20, I think it's 24.
24. Good.
Yeah. Because this is 19 and 7/8, and then I make it an inch wider on each side, so I end up with 22, so I end up losing 2 inches of it. But, I mean, if you wanted to wrap it further, if you wanted to make your different height, you could wrap it further down if you didn't want to have to cut that off and waste it.
You flip your brood boxes like you're running 2 in the springtime, like right now, do you ever flip them?
It depends. So it depends on what they're doing. The advantage of flipping them is if you don't have that top entrance, you get that brood closer to that entrance. And 2, you can get them working that top box a little bit quicker. One of the issues we've been noticing is there's a large band of nectar across the top. And getting the queen sometimes to cross that nectar is hard, especially in the spring. And then the other thing is where we've still got some cold nights coming up, I didn't want a little bit of brood down here and a little bit of brood down here. I didn't want that brood split up. I want to keep that brood together if I can. So I'm not quite ready to do anything like that yet. I know Fred used to do it all the time. Fred would reverse those boxes constantly. But I'm just now getting to the point where I'm getting into the equalizing thing. Fred always talked about equalizing hives, and I'm like, why do I want to rob Peter to pay Paul? But I can kind of see the advantage of it. Once you start managing more hives, you want to keep them equal so that you're doing the same thing on every hive at the same time.
Fred duct taped every one of his inner covers. You ever notice that? He didn't want that hole in the center of the inner covers. Why was that?
I don't know, because In the summertime, he used a shim. If you
Yeah.
ever notice on the top of his inner
Yes.
cover, there's a little piece of wood in there, and he called that a shim. And he would put that in there to prop that lid open to give him a little bit extra ventilation in the summertime. He never explained to me why he did that. I asked him a couple times, and he told me about the shim, it's for ventilation and stuff like that, but he would never tell me why he duct taped those. I don't know if it was to help keep the ants out, because I know when I had inner covers, I'd always get a bunch of those little piss ants up there, those little
Oh,
sweet
they're
ants.
terrible, yeah.
And I don't know if it was to help keep them out.
Yeah, he had some yards like in fields and stuff.
Yeah.
Back.
I'm going away with the inner cover, and I use that double bubble.
Yeah,
It seems you just peel it off.
yep. And that gives you, I think those are what, R8 or something like that?
Yeah.
The Reflectix bubble insulation.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong or not.
There's a lot of people that use that Reflectix, especially if they're using migratory covers.
Yeah.
Makes the cover lid a lot easier to get off.
I used my inner cover and poured the sugar all over it,
Yeah,
and just used that
yeah.
with an empty box on top.
I just see more pests and stuff with the inner covers than I do. Like you always got the ants up there, you always got the roaches up there, and that's why I just after a year or two, I'm like, I don't even know why I have these things. Quit using them.
You use telescoping covers or ones like that?
Just this. We build these. They're the same height. They're the same size as the box. If you use a telescoping cover without an inner cover, they'll glue that down, and it's hard
Right,
to get in there
yeah.
and pop that off. That's why you use the Reflectix. The
Okay.
Reflectix insulation,
Yeah.
that's the bubble wrap with the Mylar. The bees don't like to propolize it, so it's easier to pull
Okay.
that inner cover off, and plus
Gotcha.
it gives them that extra little bit of insulation.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that the inner cover is doing. It's giving that air gap of insulation. You're getting a little bit of insulated value off that space of air in between the inner cover and the telescoping cover.
Yeah, the covers, I make telescoping covers, I put foam in the top of those while I
Yeah.
make them.
Yeah.
Now, was you done on the swarms?
Hmm?
Talking about them.
Hmm?
I want to bring something up.
Okay.
Okay, in first 8 days before them bees get capped, you probably should treat them. That way you only got one treatment, 'cause
Yeah.
you don't know where them bees came from,
Yeah.
right?
On your swarms and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, on the swarm,
Yep.
treat them.
Yeah, you don't know where they came from. You don't know how many mites they've had. You don't know if you're getting from another beekeeper, or if you're getting, I mean, hopefully the bee trees, they've survived and they're dealing with the mites, but you just don't know.
Yeah, that bee tree I showed you, it was full of beetles,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't know about the mites, I just
Yeah.
treated them anyway.
Yeah, so if you're getting a swarm when they're broodless, it's always a good idea to go ahead and hit them with oxalic acid or some sort of treatment.
Yeah.
Speaking of treatments, Chad got, he's got an extra pack of Formic Pro that expires in September. It's normally $25 online. He said he'd sell it for $10. So if you're looking for a single treatment, it's 2 doses, 4 strips, so you can treat your hive twice, or you could treat 2 hives, depending on how you do it. But it's good till September of 2025, so it'd be good for this season if you're looking for Formic Pro. But yeah, it's a good idea to treat your swarms. You can even do it in a swarm trap, because if you catch bees in a swarm trap and you notice when they move in, as soon as you start seeing that pollen come in, you know that they've got the queen has started laying, and you can go ahead and treat them right in the swarm trap. You want to make sure there's pollen coming in, because if you go blast them with oxalic acid vapor or some other treatment before the queen is laying, you might cause them to leave. So once you see that pollen come in, you know that queen is laying.
One other question, Chris.
Okay.
Last fall, when it was a dry eye, we had 2 hives and I fed them, when it was dry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I downsized for winter and I put those frames in the freezer. Can I just put those back? We didn't want to harvest it because it was, sugar water. So
Yeah, you can use those for food for the spring, yeah.
Right, can we do that?
Mhm.
Like next inspection and then harvest later?
Yeah.
They'll consume that?
They'll consume it.
Yeah.
Especially like this week, when it's been rainy and cold, they've been going through a lot of nectar. I cut a hive out with Tom on Friday, and it was a huge hive, lots of bees. There was hardly any nectar or honey in it. I think we only pulled out 2 or 3 combs with honey in it, and there was it was in a stud cavity, so it's 16 inches wide, and it's probably every bit of 4 foot long, and just a tiny, minuscule amount of honey in it. Everybody's bees looking good? Everybody getting stung?
4
Yeah.
times.
Nope.
Chris, the
I've got-
hive we lost was that you'd open them up, they wanna kill
The
you.
mean girls.
Oh, okay. So you aren't too sad about them?
And I did a split off that, and these are just as common as they can be. But
Yeah.
I lost that hive over, well, I didn't need it, yeah, in December, they were.
Mhm.
Yeah, I said it's early. You can keep track of your stings right now. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. The bees have actually been pretty calm this year. I've been surprised. We've been we've been working mostly without gloves, and haven't had any issues. But Sunday they weren't happy with me in the rain. We were trying to get feed on a few of them because I knew they were getting.
All that
Good
wind, you
smoke.
couldn't get the smoke. I mean, they was mad.
Oh yeah,
They was mad, wasn't they?
yeah.
But
they're
they're
starting-
starting one hive, and as soon as I started in it, I just closed it back up.
Smell bananas.
Yeah. No, the first hive was okay, but that second hive,
They mad.
they was mad. I didn't even have smoker lit on the first one, and I wasn't gonna light it for the
All of
second
them
one.
was, mine, all of them was quiet, but there was one hive there that was just roaring. I hadn't even opened it up or nothing. What's wrong?
I had one hive that died on me this spring. It had a patch of brood about like that, and they wouldn't leave it when it got cold, and they died on the brood. And
Had several
sorry.
people lost hives on brood and that
Yeah.
snap around Valentine's
They had
Day.
plenty of everything.
Yeah. And it sucks. It's just like,
Yeah.
ah,
And
you
it
guys
made it
could've
all the
just
way
moved
through
an inch.
winter.
Just
Yep.
an inch. But right now, exponential growth. So basically, your hives are going to double every 10 days. So we had some that, like, I was super worried about them 2 weeks ago. I'm like, there's no way there's enough bees in here to make it. And they would start off with a small patch of brood. We'd come back a week later, and there'd be this big of a patch of brood. And then next week there'd be that size on two or three frames, and now they've got full frames of brood. So that growth is exponential, and once it gets to a certain point, it'll just start happening really, really fast. But heat is the key when they're that small. But once they get big, like the heat that was coming off that hive on Friday, even though it was cool and rainy, the heat that was coming off those bees was just amazing how much heat they produce.
And that's the reason that double screen works so well.
Yeah, especially when you're making those small, thin splits early in the spring. You can make a split with just 2 or 3 frames up above this strong hive, and it'll take off because it's sharing the heat. And double screen boards are even easier to make than the Snell Grove boards, because basically you're just taking a piece of plywood and drilling some big holes in it and putting some screen on it. Don't use fiberglass window cloth or for like a replacement on a window screen for a window. If you're going to use window cloth, use aluminum. The bees can't chew through it; they'll chew through the fiberglass. And then the other thing is 1/8-inch hardware cloth. You can't. I haven't been able to find an 1/8-inch hardware cloth anywhere around here. If anybody knows, I usually just order it on Amazon.
It's the only place I found it.
Yeah. But I usually order roll every year and make different things with. Like we got 4 trap outs out of trees we got to go do. So we've been making trap out cones out of it. So try to go get bees out of trees. They don't
What'd you
want to
say
come
it
down.
was?
Huh?
Trap out what?
Cones. Basically, it's a screen cone that you put over the entrance, and the bees will leave, but it comes down to just where a single bee can get out, and they can't get back in because they're going to go back down here towards where the entrance is. And over a period of 6 or 8 weeks, you just bleed the population down until the hive finally absconds and the queen comes out. You're going to put that cone on. You're going to set a nuke or a trap box beside it with a frame of brood, and you just slowly bleed that down and take that nuke every week and just slowly bleed that population down. It's a really, really slow process, and you have to make sure you have every crack and nook and cranny closed up. It's really hard to do on a house, but it's really easy to do on a tree. I'm not afraid to pour a bunch of silicone or spray foam on a tree because the bark will shed off and it'll go away. But getting them out of somebody's house like that's really hard. If we're going to take them out of a house, I prefer to cut them out. Any questions, thoughts, concerns?
If you have a hive swarm, do you feel like it's worth getting them back?
Getting the swarm back?
Yeah.
I've had hives swarm right in front of me in my own yard, and I catch the swarm. I don't put them back in the same hive. I just usually start a new hive with them. The thing is, if you have a hive swarm, is you want to watch for after swarms. Go in after they've swarmed and look for how many queen cells there are left in the hive, and tear down all of them but 2. Leave them 2 queen cells. One is the primary and one is a backup, just in case one of them doesn't hatch. If you leave all those queen cells in there and they've still got a really strong population, every time one of those virgin queens hatch, they're going to send out another swarm. It's called after swarming. So that hive can sit there and just slowly swarm down to almost nothing, and then hopefully turn themselves around. But if you don't go in and tear down some of those queen cells, that's why whenever I recommend after doing any kind of cut down split or any kind of split is going in and after 10 days, going in and tearing down all the queen cells except for 2. And I usually try to leave, if you remember the chart of the queens as they hatch and stuff like that, I usually try to leave one that's uncapped and one that's capped. Because that way I've got that uncapped, it's a backup, and that when that capped one hatches, she'll go kill that uncapped one. That way I don't have 2 of them in there fighting and they accidentally kill each other or whatever, or cause an after swarm. So if you are going to do any kind of splits, make sure you tear down all your excess queen cells or cut them out and use them for something. If you're going to make more splits, you can always go in with your pocket knife, your hive tool, and gently cut that swarm cell out or that queen cell out and use it to make another split out of. There's beekeepers that say never waste a perfectly good queen cell, but sometimes you just end up with too many. I think the record I saw, I had a hive swarm one time and it had 28 queen cells in it. It would have swarmed itself down to nothing.